Ready? A 1, 2, 3. Okay. Should probably get this ready.
What do you got?
So, Mark. In 2018, a 69-year-old woman in Seattle died after a mysterious year-long rash on her nose turned out to be an indication of a much larger problem. Okay. And I don't have a picture of this for you. I don't know. Maybe there is one somewhere, but what her doctor had initially assumed to be rosacea, for which he prescribed her some antibiotics, which I guess is what you do when someone has rosacea. Was discovered to be much more serious when a CT scan showed a half-inch lesion on her brain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they removed the mass and they sent it to Johns Hopkins to be analyzed. But a few days later, her left arm and her leg went numb and she presented an altered mental status. Okay. Her condition deteriorated to the point that she was put on life support. It was at this point that a neuropathologist posited that her symptoms might be consistent with an amoebic infection, and a drug was administered to combat it. Unfortunately, her condition did not improve, and she was taken off life support. The culprit behind her death: improperly sterilized water in the neti pot her doctor had prescribed her to treat a sinus infection. Do you have neti pots? Do you have neti pots there?
Neti pot?
It's like a brand name. Essentially, it's like a teapot, but you pour water into your nasal cavity and then it comes
I've seen
out.
These. I have never known of anybody over here using one of those.
I feel like it was kind of a trend here for a hot minute. And I think it is genuinely a thing that people prescribe, like doctors prescribe for sinus infections and whatnot. It's supposed to clear things out.
I know of them. I know.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a face douche, I guess you'd say. Is it something along those lines?
It's a face douche. That's exactly what it is. It sounds horrible.
It does. It sounds amazing. And it looks absurd as well.
It does.
Yeah, it's pouring something up your face.
Yeah, it's the silliest looking thing. And I can't, I would never, is all I'm saying. I don't care if you prescribe that to me. There's just no way in hell that I am pouring water up my nose and letting it drain out like that.
No chance.
I have a sensitive tube system in there and I don't like stuff in it that's not supposed to be. Like one time I sneezed out a piece of chicken by accident when someone made me laugh and it was not pleasant. So
was that the moment you became vegan?
Yeah, that was it. That's like no more
expelling.
When you have chicken come out your nose, it's like I'm done, I think, with meat. Anyways,
listen, what was in the fucking neti pot? What was in the neti pot?
So according to the CDC, you should in a neti pot only use distilled sterile or cooled boiled water for the purposes of sinus irrigation, which is a super gross phrase, by the way. And so she was purifying her water, but she was basically using like a Brita filter, the same thing that you just kind of pour your water into, and that's not enough for what you're going to dump into your nose, right?
Yeah.
So that left her open to an amoeba called Balamuthia mandrillaris, which normally lives in soil, but through this they realized, I guess sometimes it also can kind of live in water, and they're not entirely sure how this got into her water supply, but one way or another, her tap water that she was using and purifying, but only through like a Brita filter, gave her this particular amoeba that then caused...
She's slinging that up her nose, which I guess you got your nasal mucous membrane.
Straight shot into the
right all up into your cerebellum,
Yeah, and the nose we'll see is the pathway in general for this to happen. For example, in the case of a man in Louisiana in 2013, a slightly more common amoeba called Naegleria fowleri was his assassin. The Louisiana man's death came as a result, again, of using tap water in a neti pot. But this was the third death that month from Naegleria fowleri. And the other two had nothing to do with neglecting instructions for proper sinus irrigation. The first was a 16-year-old girl in Florida, of course, and then a 9-year-old boy in Virginia, who also died after being infected with Naegleria fowleri that June. The girl had been swimming and the boy had been dunked in the water at a fishing day camp, and both died within about a
Oh,
week
wow.
of these experiences. So the CDC says that Naegleria fowleri is a free-living microscopic amoeba that can cause a rare and devastating infection of the brain called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
found in warm bodies of freshwater, like lakes and rivers. And in the United States, it's generally more common in the warm southern states like Texas and Florida. It can also be contracted through contaminated water sources, such as inadequately chlorinated swimming pool water or heated and contaminated tap water. So, per an article in a publication called The Conversation, this is
Mm.
how it works. The brain is moist and warm, just like the
Yep.
lakes and hot springs where the amoeba thrives. But the brain doesn't have bacteria. Gross, Mark. The brain doesn't have bacteria for the amoeba to eat. So the
Yeah.
organism attacks brain cells for
Uh,
nutrients.
baby.
I mean, you get hungry, you got to eat what's available.
Yep.
But the immune system doesn't sit idly by while this happens. The parasite eats its way through the brain and the brain unleashes a massive swarm of immune cells to the infected zone,
Mm.
which causes inflammation and brain swelling. So this is, the body's technically doing its job.
Doing what it should, of course. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds like a similar process to meningitis.
Exactly.
It's
Yep.
an
Mhm.
inflammation in the kind of the surrounding tissues of your brain. They swell up, your brain
Precisely.
gets fucked.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and this is actually often mistaken for meningitis, which is one of the
There we go.
problems here. Yeah.
Hey, maybe I am a doctor.
Hey. Unfortunately for the person whose brain is infected, the battle is being waged inside a sturdy skull, which can't expand to accommodate a swelling brain. The increase in cranial pressure disrupts the brain's connection to the spinal cord, compromising communication with other parts of the body, like the respiratory
Hence
system.
the numb limbs, hence the...
Mhm. Exactly. And if that explanation was a little too complicated, NBC put it this way: it gets up the nose, burrows up into the skull, and destroys brain tissue.
Beautiful.
Yeah, really, really
For
poetically
some
put.
reason, I hear that in the voice of Michael Ironside from Starship Troopers. He's got that fantastic,
Yeah,
they
totally.
sucked his brain out. Probably the greatest piece of Paul Verhoeven's entire career was Michael Ironside. And he turns around and looks right to camera. They sucked his brain out. Brilliant stuff. And that's exactly what's going on there.
That is exactly what's going on here. Yeah. And much like rabies, if you contract it, you're pretty much going to die.
Yeah.
Only 4 people out of 145 known infected individuals in the United States from 1962 to 2018 have survived. And there are 3 main reasons for this. For one, its symptoms, which include headache, fever, nausea, loss of balance, hallucinations, all that stuff can be mistaken for other things, often stuff that's like much less of like a
Yeah,
big
yeah, yeah.
deal, right?
Is this amoeba, is it something you have to be specifically looking for, I guess, or is it something that's quite easy to mistake for a load of other things?
Very easy to mistake.
Mm.
So these kinds of things, so it's mistaken for all this other stuff because like that could be anything really. There's so many things that have all of those kinds of symptoms, and thus it's not caught fast enough to prevent the damage that's done by having this amoeba in you. Since patients generally die within 5 to 7 days of infection, any amount of time is crucial in figuring out what that is. So if you think this is something else, then that's a problem. Similarly, there's no quick diagnostic test for it, like you were asking. There's nothing that you can be like, oh, let me just do this, this quick fowleri test.
Yeah.
And okay, that's what we have. There's nothing
maybe
like
shine
that.
a little torch in your eyes.
Right.
Yeah,
you can't do anything like that, which is why even with that first woman, they gave her what they had as a test thinking it was N. fowleri, but it turned out to be that other type of amoeba. And because it's rare, they don't do a lot of like studies about it, right? Like if this was something that was killing thousands of people every year, there would be a ton of studies and they'd figure out how to trace for this. But because, over 50 years, there's only been, under 150 deaths. There's about 3 deaths per year on average from this. They don't
am I right
study
in
it.
saying this is a widespread, naturally occurring amoeba that you
Yeah.
fellas have over there? Yeah.
That's exactly it. The widespread part is important too. This is not like a rare amoeba.
Yeah,
The amoeba exists
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot in these warm water places, and is often stirred up by, like, if you're on the bottom of the water and you stir up the sediment and whatnot, that's where you'll find it. And this is one of the things that scientists aren't sure about, is why, if it's so common, why don't more people die of this? And they kind of
I
assume that
guess,
maybe
yeah.
some people are more susceptible to it than others. Like,
And
maybe there's,
some people are pouring it into their fucking
yeah,
face,
some
literally.
people are pouring it into
That's
their head, which, they're just giving it the fast track straight into their skull. So,
I just lost all sympathy for this woman. It's your own fault. You invited the fucking amoeba into your skull. It's your own fault.
But also the other thing about it is that you can't repair the destruction of critical brain tissue that occurs in the presence of the parasite. So once it's
No.
destroyed, it's gone. Thus, even if you figure out what it is and you try to start treating it, that person, whatever deterioration they've already experienced, is permanent. And that usually means, they're brain dead, they're vegetative. There's nothing you can do to bring them back.
Yeah.
However, I will tell you, Mark, if it's any consolation to you, Naegleria fowleri is very rarely found in Britain because of your cold ass water. So you
Yeah.
can swim in peace.
Amazing. Thank you very much. In your face. Literally in your face.
In your actual face and
Yep.
skull.
Actually, do you know,
in your nasal cavity.
Invasive organisms in water. This is not the first invasive organisms in water story I've heard this week.
Oh.
Yeah, altogether less pleasant and a little bit more viscerally. There was a show on Radio 4 that I heard this week where a guy spoke about wading through like tropical waters in South America. Okay. And he described in detail his battle with a leech which had swam up his dick.
Oh.
Yeah. He was able to grasp the end of the leech and spray kind of heat spray on it, like a muscular kind of remedy spray on it until it detached itself, and he was able to pull it out. And he now wears a dauber to on the one whenever he's going into lakes.
I would too. I think I'd learned my lesson from that.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a leech?
No, I have not.
So
I'm in no
gross.
rush to. I've seen Stand By Me. I'm in no rush to get a leech.
So gnarly. It's just disgusting, and I hate everything about that.
You might be surprised to learn that. Right, even as I'm saying this, I'm worried that I'm going to be proved wrong, but I'm sure I've read that leeches are still in use for bloodletting.
Yeah, I can't remember if
medically.
we talked about that or if that has just
Possibly.
come up separately in like other things I was looking at. But yes, there are people who still use this.
Yeah, like legitimate, doctors are not.
Yeah, exactly. It's not
cranks.
it's not like a weird bit of quackery. There's like certain things that it can be used for.
The same with maggots for dermal skin abrading. You use that maggots are still used for chewing away manky necrotic tissues.
Have I told you my maggot story, Mark?
No.
No,
I don't want you to.
So I feel like I have to. This has come up 2 days in a row because, and we'll talk about, we watch Ghost Ship and there's maggots in Ghost Ship. And I've talked about this on my other podcast, Men of Low Moral Fiber, because it involves Ben and Jason's mother. So I was in high school and we were going somewhere. And I was getting in the car with Ben and his mom. So, his mom was driving, Ben was in the passenger seat, I was in the back seat. And we had kind of like noticed there'd been a smell in the car for a bit. And I think Glee, their mom, had told us like, oh yeah, I spilled some milk in here or something like that, but I cleaned it up. And we're like, well, it's still like,
no, you didn't.
But we're like, okay, sure, whatever. And we didn't think like a lot. It just kind of was one of those things where like, yeah, the car stinks. Okay. And so we get into the car and nobody's sat in the back seat since this happened. It was usually just me and Ben in the car. So we hadn't really, investigated in any further into her claims of having
Mm.
cleaned up the spilled milk. So I sit down and I go and I reach down to grab my seatbelt, and I'm like, something squishy down here. And I pull
Oh.
my hand up, and it takes me a second. I'm just looking at my hand and I'm like, is this rice? Why is it moving? And I
Oh,
realize I have
fucking
just reached down
hell.
and picked up an entire handful of maggots from inside
That's
the seatbelt.
fucking horrible. What are they feeding on milk? Feeding on.
Yeah, I guess they were just, yeah, chilling there eating curdled milk or whatever maggots do. I don't know
Oh,
how maggots work. They're like some sort of
wild,
horrifying thing that's just there for a bad time.
wild.
And that's exactly what it was. I was just like, okay, well, I'm kind of like shook my
Oh.
hand out and went and moved over
Nah.
to the other seat where the milk had not been
Mm.
spilled. And it was absolutely horrendous. But this is, I always say, people with anxiety are always like the most cool in a like terrible situation, because we're just like, oh, the worst thing has
Mm.
happened. I expected the worst thing to
Fine.
happen. There it
Yeah,
is.
here comes
So,
my training. Yeah.
like, it didn't panic or anything. I was just kind of like, oh no. Oh, well, that's unfortunate. Just wiped him off and went on with my day. So that was fun.
We've started from a very high bar this week, haven't we, eh?
Oh yeah. Ugh. It's gonna be a good one.
Amoeba, up your cock and a handful of maggots. Welcome to Jack of all graves, everyone.